The message appeared at 3:47 Zulu, typed in all caps across every command screen from Bagram to Kandahar. Two words that made every operations officer's blood run cold: no return. The aircraft tracking system showed nothing but empty sky where Hog 17 should have been. Command had already begun drafting the notification letter. Her personnel file was open on 3 different terminals. Somewhere in Georgia, a chaplain was being briefed. The squadron ready room had gone silent in that specific way that precedes tragedy, when grown men who have seen everything suddenly find reasons to stare at their boots. Outside, the pre-dawn darkness over Afghanistan felt heavier than usual, pressing down on Bagram Airfield like a held breath. The tower chief had stopped taking calls. In the Tactical Operations Center, a colonel stood motionless before the digital display, one hand covering his mouth, the other gripping his coffee cup so hard his knuckles had gone white. The aircraft's last known position blinked on the screen like a dying heartbeat grid coordinates deep in the Tangi Valley, where 3 rescue helicopters had been shot down in the past 18 months, where the mountains rose so steep that radar became useless and radio signals vanished into rock, where the Taliban knew every cave and every sight line. The mission brief had been straightforward: close air support for a special operations team pinned down at dawn. Standard load: 30mm cannon Maverick missiles and enough ordnance to level a small village. Standard pilot: Captain Nadia Kozlov, call sign Ironside, 2 combat tour, 173 missions, 0 losses. The kind of pilot who flew like the A-10 Thunderbolt II was an extension of her own nervous system. But Standard didn't account for what happened at 3:12 Zulu when her transponder went dark mid-gun run, when her voice cut out halfway through reading back coordinates, when the infrared camera feed showed her aircraft disappearing into a canyon so narrow the wingtips nearly touched stone on both sides. The ground team's last transmission had been frantic. Hog 17 taking heavy fire, multiple hits, smoke trail, she's going down, then nothing. 45 minutes of nothing. The commander had typed it himself. No return. 3 rescue birds were spinning up on the tarmac, crews running pre-flight in the dark, knowing they were probably heading into an ambush to recover a body. The squadron commander was composing himself to make the call to her father, a retired Air Force colonel who taught her to fly in a Cessna over the Mojave when she was 12. Then Tower Control's radio crackled to life with a voice that sounded like it had been dragged through gravel and fire. Bagram Tower, Hog 17, 10 miles out, single engine, hydraulics shot, canopy fragged, request straighten emergency. The controller's hand froze over the transmit button. Every head in the operations center snapped toward the speakers. Someone whispered something that might have been a prayer. The radar screen showed a contact approaching from the west, low and slow, altitude dropping, airspeed barely above stall. The commander stared at the blip like it might disappear if he blinked. His cursor hovered over those 2 words, no return, finger trembling above the delete key. On the tarmac, the rescue crews stopped mid-sprint, faces turning skyward. The pre-dawn gloom was starting to fade, bruised purple bleeding into charcoal gray. Somewhere in that twilight, an A-10 Warthog was limping home on one engine, and a prayer trailing smoke like a banner, its pilot still breathing, still flying, still refusing to be written off. The tower chief grabbed his binoculars and stepped outside, scanning the western horizon. Fire crews scrambled toward the runway. Medics jumped into ambulances. The whole airfield suddenly moved with the choreographed chaos of people who'd practiced this scenario 100 times but never expected to actually need it. The commander finally deleted those 2 words, started typing something else. Something about combat rescue, about medical standing by, about clearing the airspace and foaming the runway. But his hands were shaking so badly he had to stop and breathe. Because against every statistical probability, against the terrain and the enemy and the damage reports, Ironside was coming home, and everyone on Bagram Airfield was about to witness exactly why some pilots earned their call signs in blood and titanium. The A-10 appeared first as a dark speck against the lightning sky, growing larger with agonizing slowness. Through the binoculars, the tower chief could see the damage. Canopy spiderwebbed with cracks, left engine trailing black smoke, sections of the fuselage that looked like they'd been chewed by a giant metal beast. The aircraft yawed slightly, overcorrected, steadied. Flew like something that should have fallen out of the sky 20 minutes ago but was held aloft by pure stubborn will. The radio crackled again. Tower Hog 17, I've got maybe one approaching me, no go around, you're gonna want crash cruise at midfield. Her voice was steady despite what had to be screaming pain somewhere in that battered cockpit. Protocol demanded the controller ask for souls on board, fuel state, nature of emergency. He skipped all of it. Hog 17, runway 31, winds light and variable, you're cleared to land, emergency equipment standing by. The operations center had filled with personnel who had no business being there, drawn by some magnetic pull of the impossible. Pilots crowded the windows. Maintainers stood in the doorways. The chaplain who'd been briefed for a notification was now watching the approach with his hands clasped, lips moving silently. On the display screen, Hog 17's altitude continued dropping 800 feet, 600, 400. The approach was too steep, the airspeed too low. Every pilot watching knew she was riding the edge of a stall, that damaged bird held in the air by nothing but her skill and the A-10's legendary refusal to die. The landing gear came down with visible resistance, the right main hanging at an odd angle. The tower chief swore softly. That gear was going to collapse on touchdown. The crash crews knew it too, foam trucks accelerating into position, water cannons charging. The sun broke the horizon just as Hog 17 crossed the runway threshold, painting the smoke trail gold and crimson. The aircraft dropped the last 50 feet faster than it should have. The right gear touched first and immediately buckled. The A-10 slewed sideways, spraying sparks. The left wing dipped toward the concrete. For a horrifying second, it looked like the whole aircraft would cartwheel. Then the nose came down hard. The ventral guns housing hit the runway in a shower of sparks, and momentum carried the Warthog forward in a grinding, shrieking slide that threw up concrete dust and hydraulic fluid and pieces of aircraft. 300 meters of controlled destruction. 200 meters. The damaged engine finally quit, coughed black smoke, went silent. 100 meters. The slide was slowing. 50 meters. The fire suppression foam was already covering the fuselage. 20 meters. They came to rest slightly off centerline, canted at an angle looking like it had been through a war, which technically it had. The canopy popped open before the crash crews could reach it. Captain Nadia Kozlov climbed out herself, waved off the medics running toward her, stood on the wing and surveyed her broken bird with an expression that was part grief, part pride, entirely unreadable. Blood ran down the left side of her face from somewhere under her helmet. Her flight suit was torn at the shoulder, she was limping, and she was absolutely, defiantly alive. The commander watched from the operations center as she finally accepted help climbing down as the medics guided her toward the ambulance as she stopped halfway there and turned back to look at the aircraft one more time. Someone near him said, "How the hell did she fly that thing home?" Someone else answered quietly, "Because she's Ironside, and Ironside doesn't quit." The sun was fully up now, harsh and bright across the Afghan desert. The no-return message was deleted from every screen, replaced with casualty reports 0 and aircraft status destroyed but recoverable. In the ready room, pilots were already pulling up the gun camera footage, trying to piece together what had happened in that valley. The ground team she'd been supporting was already calling in, asking about their angel in the sky, the pilot who'd taken a missile hit to save their position and somehow still made it home. The debrief happened 6 hours later in a windowless room that smelled like bad coffee and old stress. Nadia sat with 14 stitches in her scalp, her left arm in a sling, and a look on her face that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. The intelligence officer queued up the gun camera footage. The room darkened. The screen flickered to life, showing the Tangi Valley from 4,000 feet, gray mountains and green valleys in the early morning light. Her voice came through the audio, calm and professional, reading coordinates to the ground team. Viper 2-3, Hog 17 has visual on your position. Multiple hostile contacts in the tree line north of your pose. I'm coming around for gun run. The A-10's nose dipped. The 30mm cannon sight centered on targets invisible to the untrained eye. The footage showed the gun run smooth, precise, devastating. Trees exploded into splinters. Then the missile launch. Someone in the valley with a Chinese-made MANPAD had waited for exactly this moment, when the A-10 was low and slow and committed to the attack. The white smoke trail appeared at the bottom of the screen, racing upward. Nadia's voice, still calm. Missile launch, braking left, the A-10 rolled hard, dumping flares, pulling G-forces that made the camera shake. The missile went for the flares, proximity fused, detonated 50 meters behind the left engine. Shrapnel tore through the tail section, the left engine, the hydraulics. The camera showed the master caution lights illuminating like a Christmas tree. Normal procedure said climb out, gain altitude, assess damage, head for base. Nadia dove back into the valley. The intelligence officer paused the footage. Every person in that room was staring. She looked at them with those pale gray eyes that had earned her the call sign Ironside, not because she was cold, but because once she committed to something, she was immovable. The ground team was still taking fire, she said simply. I had one engine and about 5 minutes before the hydraulics quit completely, so I used them. The footage resumed. The gun camera showed her circling back into the valley on one engine, smoke pouring from the damaged A-10, making another run on the hostile positions. The 30mm cannon roared again. More trees disintegrated. The ground team's voice came through, panicked and awed. Hog 17, you're on fire, get out of here. Her response, negative, you've still got contacts east side, I'm not done. She made 2 more runs. The hydraulics were failing, visible in how sluggishly the aircraft responded. The canopy took small arms fire, spiderwebbing the glass. The right engine was redlining from carrying the full load. She kept flying, kept shooting, kept buying the ground team time to displace to a defensive position. By the time she pulled off target, the A-10 was barely controllable. The footage showed her nursing it out of the valley, gaining precious altitude one painful foot at a time, the mountains so close on either side that their shadows filled the canopy. Then the radio failure, the transponder failure. 20 minutes of flying a crippled aircraft through hostile airspace with no communication, no backup, nothing but skill and an intimate knowledge of exactly how much abuse an A-10 could take before it quit. The footage ended. The lights came up. The intelligence officer looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The squadron commander spoke instead. Captain Kozlov, what you did was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've seen in 23 years of service. He paused, seemed to be struggling with something. The ground team made it out, all 8 of them. 0 casualties. They want to buy you a drink. Nadia nodded slowly, wincing at the movement. I'll take that drink, but someone else is buying the aircraft. That bird's done. The maintainer in the corner actually laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. Ma'am, that aircraft took a proximity-fused missile, multiple cannon rounds, flew 70 nautical miles on one engine and landed gear up without killing you. We're not buying a new one. We're rebuilding that one and putting your name on it. The story should have ended there, in that debrief room with the footage and the stitches and the grudging respect. But stories like this don't end cleanly. They ripple outward in ways that change everything they touch. The ground team Viper 2-3, special operations, the kind of soldiers who aren't supposed to need saving, sent a bottle of bourbon to her quarters with a note that said simply, "We owe you everything. Come find us when you're healed." The maintenance chief framed a piece of shrapnel from the missile blast, mounted it on wood with a small plaque. The piece that missed, close only counts in horseshoes and MANPADs. It went up in the ready room next to photos of legendary pilots and historic missions. But the real changes were quieter, harder to quantify. The way junior pilots started asking Nadia for advice instead of just nodding politely when she offered it. The way the commander started including her in mission planning sessions, usually reserved for senior officers. The way the jokes in the ready room shifted, no more comments about women in combat aircraft. No more questioning whether she could handle the stress, the G-forces, the split-second decisions. She'd answered all those questions in the most definitive way possible, by refusing to die when dying would have been easier than fighting her way home. 3 weeks later, her arm out of the sling, the stitches replaced by a thin scar hidden under her hairline, Nadia stood in the maintenance hangar staring at what remained of Hog 17. The aircraft sat on jack stands, looking like a patient in surgery. The left engine was completely removed. The tail section was Swiss cheese. The canopy was a spider web of cracks held together by ballistic tape. Technicians swarmed over it like devoted surgeons, taking measurements, ordering parts, arguing about structural integrity in the specialized language of people who make broken things whole. The maintenance chief appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of terrible hangar coffee. "She'll fly again," he said, handing her a cup. "Maybe not this deployment, but she'll fly." Nadia sipped the coffee, grimaced at the taste, kept drinking anyway. "You really think so? I rode her pretty hard." The chief snorted. "Captain, this bird has taken worse. A-10s were built by people who understood that war is ugly and nothing works perfectly, and the best aircraft is the one that keeps flying when everything's gone to hell." He gestured at the damaged engine. "You know why warthogs have 2 engines mounted high on the fuselage?" She didn't know every A-10 pilot learned this in training, but she let him tell it anyway. "So that if you lose one, the other one can still get you home. So that if you're low and slow doing close air support, ground fire has to get through the wings and the armored bathtub and the redundant systems before it stops you. This aircraft was designed by people who knew pilots would do exactly what you did, stay in the fight past the point of sanity, because ground troops needed you." He paused, seemed to be considering his next words carefully. "Most pilots don't push it that far. Most pilots hit their limit somewhere between the missile strike and the second gun run. They make the smart choice: egress, preserve the aircraft, live to fly another day." Nadia didn't answer immediately. She was thinking about those 8 voices on the radio, ground team Viper 2-3, calling for help in the kind of calm, professional tone that barely masked terror. Thinking about the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. "They would have died," she said finally. "Maybe, probably, those mountains that many hostiles no air cover." She shook her head. "They would have died." The chief nodded slowly. "Yeah, they would have, and because you stayed, because you broke every rule about self-preservation and crew survival, they didn't. That's the choice, isn't it, every time, the safe choice or the right choice." He tapped the fuselage gently, almost affectionately. "This bird made the same choice you did. She could have quit, could have come apart, could have dropped you into those mountains, but she held together just long enough." The Bourbon with Viper 2-3 happened in a dusty tent outside the wire, unauthorized and definitely against regulations, which made it exactly the kind of thing that mattered. 8 soldiers, faces weathered by desert and war, stood when Nadia ducked through the tent flap. The team leader call sign Viper 6. A barrel-chested master sergeant with a Carolina accent gripped her hand like he was afraid she might disappear. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 16 years. I've worked with every kind of air support there is. Apache, Vipers, Spectres, Reapers. Never seen anything like what you did." He poured the Bourbon into plastic cups with the solemnity of a religious ceremony. "You took a missile for us. Literally. That MANPAD was tracking our heat signature until you lit up those flares." Another soldier spoke up, younger, with a New York accent that made every word sound aggressive even when he was being sincere. "When we heard the explosion, we thought you were done. When you came back around for another run." He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. "They drank. The Bourbon was good, probably cost more than military regulations allowed for, definitely smuggled in through channels nobody discussed officially. It burned going down and settled warm in the stomach." One of the team medics, a quiet woman with observant eyes, asked the question they'd probably all been wondering. "Why'd you do it?" "You could have punched out, let the bird crash, we would have understood." Nadia considered the question, rolled the Bourbon around her cup. "My father was Air Force. Flew F-4s in Vietnam. He told me a story once about a Phantom pilot who stayed with his aircraft after taking a hit because he was covering a rescue operation. Flew that burning F-4 for another 10 minutes, giving the rescue bird time to extract a downed crew." She paused. They gave him the Air Force Cross posthumously. At the ceremony, one of the rescued pilots said something I never forgot. He had a choice between maybe dying and definitely letting us die. That's not really a choice at all. The tent went quiet. Outside, the Afghan wind picked up, rattling the canvas. Somewhere in the distance, artillery fired outgoing, the dull thump of friendly guns supporting some operation in the darkness. Viper 6 raised his cup. To Ironside, who proved that call signs are earned in fire. They drank again. The conversation shifted to easier topics: home, food better than MREs, sports teams, the universal military practice of complaining about the chain of command. But something had been established in that tent, a bond forged in the specific way that only combat creates, between people who have looked at death together and decided it could wait. Later, walking back to her quarters under stars so bright they looked artificial, Nadia thought about legacy, about what gets remembered and what gets forgotten, about the difference between surviving and living. Her father had told her another story once, after too much whiskey at her college graduation. About a mission he'd flown where everything went wrong. The bombs didn't release, the wingman took ground fire, the weather turned hostile. They'd limped home, landed safely, and filed a report that made it sound routine. Nobody remembers the missions where everything works perfectly, he'd said. Those are just sorties, just hours in the logbook. The ones that matter are the ones where it all goes to hell and you still find a way to complete the mission, bring your wingman home, do the job you swore to do. At the time, she'd thought it was just old pilot talk, the kind of warrior mythology that sounds profound after bourbon. Now, walking past the maintenance hangar where Hog 17 sat in pieces being slowly, lovingly rebuilt, she understood. The mission wasn't just dropping ordnance or supporting ground troops or following the tactical plan. The mission was the promise, spoken or unspoken, that you wouldn't quit, wouldn't leave people behind, wouldn't take the easy way out when the hard way was the right way. The message came through official channels 3 days later. The ground team had submitted a citation recommending Captain Nadia Kozlov for the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation language was dry, bureaucratic, full of phrases like extraordinary achievement and aerial flight and meritorious service. It didn't capture the smoke or the fear or the grinding sound of a crippled aircraft coming apart. But between the official lines, if you knew how to read it, the story was there. The squadron commander called her into his office. He didn't ask her to sit, just looked at her for a long moment like he was reassessing something he thought he'd understood. "You know what the hardest part of command is?" he asked finally. She waited, watching young officers like you do things that are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and knowing that if I'd been in that cockpit, I'd probably have done the same thing. He paused. "The DFC citation is moving up the chain. It'll get approved, no question. You'll pin it on, your father will be proud, it'll go in your service record." Another pause. "But here's what I need you to understand. You're a good pilot, maybe a great one, but you're no good to anyone dead. Next time, and there will be a next time because this is Afghanistan and we're nowhere near done. I need you to find the line between brave and suicidal and stay on the right side of it." Nadia met his eyes. "With respect, sir, I found that line. I stayed on it. That's why I'm here having this conversation instead of being a statistic." The commander's expression shifted, something that might have been a smile or might have been resignation. "Fair enough. Dismissed." She was at the door when he spoke again. "Kozlov, for what it's worth, every pilot in this squadron would fly with you. That's not something I can say about everyone." The rebuilt aircraft arrived back on the flight line 6 weeks later. Hog 17, resurrected from what should have been scrap metal, gleaming with fresh paint and new panels, and the kind of meticulous attention that suggested the maintenance crew had taken the rebuild personally. They'd done more than repair the damage. They'd improved it, upgraded systems, reinforced structures, turned a wounded bird into something stronger than it had been before the missile strike. Nadia did the walk-around inspection with the maintenance chief hovering nearby like a nervous parent. Every rivet was perfect, every panel aligned precisely. The new canopy was crystal clear, unmarred by spiderweb cracks or bullet strikes. The engines, both of them, purred with mechanical confidence during the run-up. "She's better than factory fresh," the chief said with obvious pride. We pulled every trick, every upgrade, every improvement that procurement won't pay for but that we know makes the aircraft better. This bird won't quit on you. Nadia ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the smooth titanium bathtub that protected the cockpit, the thick armor that made the A-10 nearly indestructible. Someone had stenciled something new below the canopy rail, small letters in white paint. Ironside's Chariot Tangi Valley Survivor. The first flight was supposed to be a functional check basic maneuvers, systems verification, landing practice. Nadia flew it like a test pilot, methodical and precise, checking every control input, every gauge reading, every response characteristic. The A-10 handled like it was brand new, all the battle damage erased, all the trauma healed. But she could feel it, some intangible quality that hadn't been there before, like the aircraft remembered what they'd been through together and had decided they were a team now. The landing was smooth. The debrief was routine. The logbook entry was standard. But when she climbed out of the cockpit, the maintenance crew was watching with expressions that suggested this had been more than just a test flight. This had been a resurrection, a second chance, a statement that sometimes broken things can be made whole. The missions continued. Afghanistan didn't pause for repairs or citations or philosophical reflection about bravery and survival. Nadia flew close air support, armed reconnaissance, combat search and rescue escort. She flew through dust storms and mountain passes and skis filled with tracers. She flew with the steady competence of someone who'd looked at the worst-case scenario and survived it, which made everything else feel manageable by comparison. But something had shifted. The other pilots treated her differently now, not with the casual dismissal that often greeted female pilots in combat squadrons, but with the specific respect reserved for people who'd proven themselves in the only way that really mattered. The ready room conversations included her by default. The mission planning sessions solicited her input. The younger pilots asked her to review their tactics, their approaches, their decision trees. She'd become, without quite intending to, a standard against which others measured themselves. The ground teams requested her specifically. "Get us Ironside," they'd say when calling for close air support. Not just any A-10, not just any pilot. They wanted the one who'd taken a missile and kept fighting, the one who understood that the mission was the people, not the aircraft or the ordnance or the after-action report. 6 months after the Tangi Valley mission, a new pilot joined the squadron. Fresh from training, enthusiastic in the way that only people who haven't been shot at yet can be. She found Nadia in the ready room studying maps and asked the question that was probably on her mind since assignment day. "Is it true what they say about you? About staying in the fight after the missile hit?" Nadia looked up from the maps, saw herself from 6 months ago in this new pilot's eyes, eager, uncertain, trying to figure out how to be good at a job where good might not be good enough. "It's true," she said carefully, "but don't make the mistake of thinking it was heroic. It was math. 8 lives versus 1. The equation was simple." The new pilot, Lieutenant Rachel Okoye, call sign still to be determined, sat down uninvited, the way young officers do when they think they've found a mentor. "How did you know you could make it back? After the damage, after the system's failures?" It was a good question. Nadia set down the maps. "I didn't know. Nobody knows. That's the thing about flying combat. You make the best decision you can with the information you have, and then you deal with the consequences." She paused, trying to articulate something she'd only recently begun to understand herself. "But here's what I learned. The A-10 is built by people who understood that war is chaos and plans fail and everything goes wrong. So they built in redundancy. 2 engines, 2 hydraulic systems, mechanical backup controls, armor around everything vital. They designed it to keep flying when it should fall apart." Another pause. "And they trained pilots to keep fighting when quitting would be easier." That's the real redundancy, the human factor, the choice to stay when leaving is an option. Okoye absorbed this, young and serious and probably not fully understanding yet but trying. "What if I'm not brave enough? When it happens, when everything goes wrong?" Nadia smiled, not unkindly. "Bravery is overrated. Competence is what matters. Know your aircraft, know your weapons, know your limits. Practice until the procedures are automatic. Then when the crisis comes, you won't have to be brave. You'll just do what you've trained to do. It was the same advice her father had given her, years ago, translated through experience into something she could believe. The deployment ended the way deployments do, with countdown calendars and short-timer jokes, and the peculiar mix of relief and guilt that comes from leaving a war zone while the war continues. Nadia packed her gear, cleaned her quarters, did the final flights. Hog 17 would stay in theater with a new pilot, continuing the mission, adding new stories to its growing legend. The flight home was long and uncomfortable, military transport packed with personnel and equipment, the aircraft smelling like fuel and unwashed bodies and exhaustion. Nadia slept in fits, dreaming of mountain valleys and missile trails and radio voices calling for help. She woke somewhere over the Atlantic, disoriented, momentarily unsure if she was in a transport or a cockpit, if the engines she heard were friendly or hostile. The soldier across from her army infantry, young and sunburned, was awake too, staring at nothing with the thousand-yard stare of someone processing things that don't process easily. They made eye contact. He noticed the pilot wings on her uniform, the patches, the combat ribbon. "You're Ironside," he said, not a question. She blinked, surprised. "How did you the patch?" He pointed to the small unit insignia on her shoulder. "My platoon worked with Hog drivers. They talk about you." "About the Tangi Valley thing." He paused, seemed uncertain whether to continue. "My squad leader was on that mission, Viper 2-3. He said you saved their asses when you should have been saving yours." Nadia didn't know what to say to that. The soldier nodded slowly, seemed to understand that some things don't need verbal acknowledgement. "Just wanted to say thanks, for guys like my squad leader, for doing the job even when it's trying to kill you." The rest of the flight passed in silence. But the conversation stayed with Nadia, the casual way this random infantryman knew her call sign, the ripple effect of that one mission spreading through the deployed force in the way that stories do. She'd wanted to be a good pilot. Somewhere along the way, without quite intending to, she'd become a legend. The danger of legends, she was learning, is that they're not really about you. They're about what people need to believe, that someone will come when called, that courage exists, that the mission matters more than the risk. Stateside felt strange after Afghanistan. Everything too clean, too safe, too far from consequences. Nadia spent 2 weeks of post-deployment leave at her father's house in Nevada, sleeping in her childhood bedroom, running in the desert dawn, trying to decompress. Her father didn't ask about the deployment directly. He'd flown enough combat missions to know that the important things don't fit into casual conversation. But one evening, sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, he said, "Your mother called me when she saw the news article about the Distinguished Flying Cross." Nadia hadn't known there was a news article. Her father handed her his phone, showing a military news website with a photo of her in dress blues, the medal pinned to her chest, looking uncomfortable with the attention. The headline read, "A-10 pilot's heroism saves Special Operations Team." The article got most of the facts right but missed the texture, the fear, the grinding certainty that she was probably going to die but was going to take some hostile positions with her first. "You did good," her father said quietly. "Better than good, you did what needed doing." He paused, staring at the desert sunset painting the sky in oranges and purples. "Your grandfather flew B-17s over Germany. 25 missions, came home without a scratch. He told me once that the hardest part wasn't the combat. It was coming home and trying to explain to people who'd never been there why he kept going back up, mission after mission, watching crews get shot down, knowing he was probably next." Another pause. He said the only people who understood were the other crews, the ones who'd made the same choice, to keep flying into flak because that was the job and someone had to do it. Nadia understood. The only people who really got it were Viper 2-3, huddled in that tent over Bourbon, or the maintenance chief who rebuilt Hog 17 with something approaching reverence, or Lieutenant Akoy trying to learn how to be brave enough for a job that doesn't care about bravery. The citation ceremony happened at Nellie's Air Force Base with more formality than Nadia would have preferred. Dress blues, polished shoes. A crowd of people she didn't know watching as a general she'd never met read the citation aloud, and pinned the distinguished flying cross to her uniform. The words sounded strange, disconnected from the actual experience. Extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. Displayed courage and airmanship under extremely hazardous conditions. Meritorious service in direct support of combat operations. Her father was there, retired colonel's uniform pressed and perfect, standing in the front row with an expression of fierce pride that made her throat tight. Her mother was there too, looking small and worried and relieved all at once. Some of her squadron mates had flown in for the ceremony, filling the back rows, offering silent solidarity from people who understood that medals were nice, but living through the mission to receive them was better. After the ceremony, after the handshakes and photos and congratulations from people who'd never sat in a cockpit taking fire, Viper 6 found her in the parking lot. He'd flown commercial from North Carolina, was wearing dress greens with enough ribbons to indicate a long career of hard missions. "Ma'am, my team wanted you to have this." He handed her a shadow box custom-made, high-quality wood and glass. Inside was a piece of fuselage from Hog 17, the section that had taken the most shrapnel, mounted over a background of the Afghanistan tactical map with the Tangi Valley coordinates marked. 8 signatures were inscribed on the mat, every member of Viper 2-3. Below the signatures, a single line in precise lettering: "She stayed in the fight." Nadia stared at it, fighting the sudden urge to cry, winning barely. "You didn't have to do this." Viper 6 smiled. "Yeah, we did. Because someday, when you're old and retired and wondering if any of it mattered, you can look at that and know. It mattered. You mattered. We're all alive because you decided that our lives were worth more than yours." The Air Force being the Air Force, there was no time for extended philosophical reflection. New assignment, new squadron, new missions. Nadia found herself at Moody Air Force Base in Georgia, flying A-10s in a training role, teaching the next generation of pilots how to employ the Warthog in combat. It felt strange at first, being the instructor instead of the student, the experienced voice instead of the questioning one. But she adapted, taught the weapon systems, the tactics, the procedures. And in the spaces between official curriculum, taught the things that mattered more. How to stay calm when the master caution lights illuminate. How to trust your training when instinct says panic. How to make the hard choices that define whether you're just a pilot or someone who understands that the aircraft is a tool and the mission is the people. Lieutenant Akoy showed up in her advanced course 6 months later, no longer fresh-faced but still eager, still trying to prove something to herself or the world or both. During a debriefing after a particularly challenging training mission, Akoy asked, "How do you know when to break off, when to stop pushing and preserve the aircraft?" The other students leaned in, sensing this was one of those questions that touched something deeper than tactics. Nadia thought about it, about the Tangi Valley and the missile strike and the choice that wasn't really a choice. You know the technical answer: fuel state, damage assessment, tactical situation. But the real answer is more complicated. You have to know the difference between risk that serves the mission and risk that's just ego or stubbornness or proving something. She paused, making eye contact with each student. The mission is always the people on the ground who called for help, not your pride, not your reputation. Not even your survival. When you're making that split-second decision, the question is simple: what choice gives them the best chance of making it home? One of the other students, a captain who'd already done one combat deployment, spoke up. "But what if the choice that helps them kills you?" Nadia smiled, not with humor but with the kind of hard-earned knowledge that comes from living through the scenario. "Then you make your peace with it, fast. Because hesitation kills people, maybe you, maybe them, maybe both. The choice is never perfect. The choice is always terrifying, but it's still a choice, and you're the only one in the cockpit who can make it." The classroom went quiet in the way that indicates real learning happening, the kind that transcends procedures and regulations and becomes personal truth. After class, Akoy lingered. "The Tangi Valley mission, do you think about it?" "Every day," Nadia admitted. "Not the whole mission, but moments, the sound of the missile launch warning, the feel of the controls going sluggish when the hydraulics failed, the voice of Viper 6 calling that they were pinned down." She paused. "And the landing, the way Bagram looked coming out of the dawn, The certainty that I wasn't going to make it coupled with the determination to try anyway. Akoy nodded slowly. Does it get easier? The fear? No, you just get better at functioning through it. The fear is information. It means you understand the stakes. The day you stop being afraid is the day you've stopped paying attention, and that's when you make mistakes that kill people. It was the most honest answer Nadia could give. The shadow box from Viper 23 hung in her office at Moody, visible from her desk, a constant reminder of what the job really meant. Students noticed it, asked about it sometimes. She'd tell them the story clinical, factual, stripped of drama. But the message was always the same. Competence matters, preparation matters, and sometimes the right choice is the one that scares you most. The years passed in the peculiar way military time does, deployments and training cycles and assignments bleeding into each other, marked by changing ranks and new faces and the steady accumulation of experience. Nadia made major, then lieutenant colonel, commanded a squadron, did another deployment to Afghanistan, then one to Syria. Each mission added layers to the legend of Ironside, stories told in ready rooms and passed between ground teams. The time she provided close air support through a sandstorm that grounded every other aircraft. The rescue mission, where she stayed on station 2 hours past bingo fuel. The precision strike that saved a surrounded platoon with danger-close ordnance that missed the friendlies by meters. But the Tangi Valley mission remained the defining story, the one that got told and retold, each repetition adding mythic elements while somehow staying true to the essential truth. A pilot who'd made the hard choice and paid for it in blood and titanium and come out the other side still flying. The new generation of A-10 pilots knew the story before they met her. Some were disappointed that she wasn't larger than life, didn't fit the Hollywood version of a combat pilot. Others understood immediately that the realness was the point. She was proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when the situation demanded it. On a Tuesday afternoon in spring, teaching a tactics class at the weapons school, Nadia's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief. Viper 6, retiring next month, would be honored if Ironside could attend the ceremony. We're all still alive because of you. She stared at the message for a long moment, thinking about that tent in Afghanistan, the bourbon in plastic cups, the bond forged in combat that time and distance hadn't eroded. Thought about 8 soldiers who'd become a permanent part of her story, whose survival justified every risk she'd taken. She typed back, "I'll be there. Honor is mine." Because that was the thing about choices made in combat. They weren't isolated moments, but threads that wove through entire lives, connecting people who might otherwise have never met, creating obligations that transcended duty or regulation or normal human interaction. Viper 6 had called for help, and she'd answered. That simple transaction had created a permanent connection. The retirement ceremony was at Fort Bragg, formal and military in the way that ceremonies for special operations soldiers usually aren't. Viper 6 Master Sergeant Michael Torres, she learned, the man behind the call sign, stood at attention while a colonel read his service record. 22 years, 4 combat deployments, decorations that included 2 silver stars and a Purple Heart. When they handed him the folded flag and shook his hand, his eyes swept the crowd and found Nadia. He smiled. The reception afterward was less formal. Soldiers in service dress mingling with family and friends, trading stories and lies and the kind of aggressive affection that military people use to express things they can't say directly. Torres found her near the refreshments, introduced her to his wife and kids, told them this was the pilot who'd saved his life in Afghanistan. His wife gripped Nadia's hand with surprising strength. "Thank you for bringing him home, for giving my kids their father." There was no good response to that. Nadia nodded, accepted it, felt the weight of it settle into the collection of moments that defined who she was. The other members of Viper 23 were there, older now, some retired, some still serving, all carrying the Afghanistan deployment in the set of their shoulders and the things they didn't say. They gathered around Nadia like she was a talisman, told stories about the mission that had become polished with repetition, embellished with each telling but still fundamentally true. "The sound of that A-10 gun," one of them said, I've never heard anything more beautiful, like God's own chainsaw clearing the enemy positions. Another. When we saw you were hit when the smoke trail started, I thought we were done. Then you came back around for another run and I knew that we were going to make it because our pilot was too stubborn to quit. Tours raised a beer, unofficial and against the venue's regulations, but nobody was enforcing them today. To Ironside, who taught us that sometimes the cavalry really does arrive, and sometimes she's flying a 30,000-pound gun with wings. They drank to that. Nadia felt something shift inside her, some piece of the Tangi Valley mission finally settling into place. She'd carried it for years as a burden, a moment of questionable judgment that happened to work out, a risk that by rights should have killed her. But seeing these men, healthy and whole and building lives that extended beyond that valley in Afghanistan, she understood differently. It wasn't a burden. It was a gift, the opportunity to make a choice that mattered absolutely, to put her skills and her aircraft and her life on the line for people who needed her, to prove that the promise of close air support was more than just words in a tactical manual. The party wound down. Families collected tired children. Soldiers drifted away to whatever came next. Tors walked Nadia to her rental car, moving with the slight limp of someone who'd spent too many years carrying too much weight over too much rough terrain. "I need to tell you something," he said, serious now. "About that day, what we didn't put in the after-action report." Nadia waited. "When you took that missile hit, when we heard the explosion, my radio man said we should call off the air support, that you were done, that we needed to displace and evade." Tors paused, looking at the North Carolina sky like it might have answers. "I told him no, told him Ironside wouldn't quit on us, that if her bird was still flying she'd be coming back around, and 30 seconds later there you were, shot to hell and still bringing the gun to bear." He turned to look at her directly. "That's faith, you understand. Faith that another human being will do the impossible thing because it's the right thing. You gave that to us, and then you proved it was justified." Nadia's throat was tight. "I was just doing my job," Tors smiled. "That's what everyone says who does something extraordinary, just my job. But it wasn't just anything, it was everything. It was the difference between my kids having a father and growing up without one." The drive back to the airport gave Nadia time to think. About Tors and his team. About all the missions since then. About the students she was training to make the same kinds of choices, to understand that being a pilot meant more than stick-and-rudder skills and weapons employment. It meant being the person who answered when someone called for help, even when answering was dangerous, expensive, terrifying. The A-10 community was small, close-knit in the way that communities built around a specific mission tend to be. Everyone knew everyone. Stories circulated. The Tangi Valley mission was part of the oral tradition now, told to new pilots as an example of what the aircraft could survive and what the pilot had to be willing to do. But Nadia was discovering that legacy wasn't just about what you did. It was about what you inspired others to do. Lieutenant Akoy had made captain, deployed to Syria, earned her own combat medals by providing close air support during a complex urban rescue. She'd sent Nadia a message afterward, "Thought about you the whole mission, about staying in the fight, about the job being the people, not the aircraft. We got them all out. Thank you for showing me what right looks like." That message was worth more than any medal. The instructor pilot position at Moody ended with a promotion and a new assignment operations officer for an A-10 squadron deploying to Poland. Deterrence missions along NATO's eastern flank. Different enemy but same aircraft, same mission, same fundamental promise to show up when called. The squadron was young, eager, untested. Nadia's first day, she walked through the maintenance hangars, looking at the aircraft that would become hers to employ, to risk, to bring home safely. One of them had nose art unofficial, probably against regulations, definitely meaningful. A stylized warthog with the name Ironside II painted below the canopy rail. She found the crew chief responsible. "Explain this." The crew chief, a technical sergeant with 20 years of wrenching on A-10s, didn't look apologetic. "Ma'am, the bird needed a name. The crew voted. Figured if we're flying into contested airspace, we want Ironside's luck with us. Nadia should have ordered it removed, should have cited regulations about nose art approval and chain of command and proper procedures. Instead, she said, make sure it's spelled right, and if this aircraft takes any damage, you're rebuilding it to better than new. That's the standard, the crew chief grinned. Yes, ma'am, that's always been the standard. The deployment to Poland was different from Afghanistan, more political posturing, less active combat, endless training missions that simulated war without the actual dying. But the readiness was real, the threat was real, and the promise remained the same. If called, they would answer. Nadia flew patrol missions along the border, practiced weapons employment, integrated with NATO partners, maintained the razor's edge of competence that close air support demanded. And she trained her pilots relentlessly, pushing them through scenarios that tested decision-making under pressure, forcing them to confront the choices that couldn't be made from the comfort of a classroom. One pilot washed out, couldn't handle the stress, accepted a transfer to a different mission set. Nadia didn't hold it against him. Better to discover your limits in training than in combat. The others hardened, improved, became the kind of pilots who could be trusted with the mission. 6 months into the deployment, a call came through secure channels. American Special Operations conducting a classified mission. Things had gone sideways. They needed immediate close air support in an area where air support wasn't supposed to be operating. The kind of mission that didn't officially exist but absolutely needed to happen. Nadia took the sortie herself, Ironside II loaded with full combat ordnance, flying into contested airspace with the same calm professionalism she'd shown in the Tangi Valley. The mission went smoothly: textbook close air support, precision weapons employment, ground team extracted without casualties. The after-action report was classified, the mission scrubbed from official records. The whole operation disappeared into the bureaucratic machinery that handles things that never happened. But the ground team commander sent a message through back channels. Tell Ironside the legend is real. We're all coming home because she showed up. Nadia added it to the mental collection of moments that defined her career, her life, her understanding of what it meant to be not just a pilot, but someone who'd chosen this specific job with its specific demands and specific rewards. The deployment ended. Another successful rotation, another set of pilots trained, another demonstration that deterrence works when backed by competent forces ready to fight. Nadia returned stateside to a new assignment, not flying now but shaping doctrine, writing the tactics manuals and training syllabi that would guide the next generation of A-10 pilots. It was important work, necessary work, but she missed the cockpit with an ache that surprised her. Retirement was creeping closer, inevitable as gravity, the Air Force's way of making room for younger officers with fresher perspectives. Nadia started thinking about what came next, what happened when flying wasn't the answer to the question of how to spend her days. But first, one more thing. The Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson had contacted her about an exhibit on close air support, specifically about the A-10's role in supporting ground troops. They wanted to feature the Tangi Valley mission, wanted to display pieces of Hog 17 alongside the story of what happened that night in Afghanistan. Wanted her flight helmet, her patches, the symbolic artifacts that would help future generations understand what close air support really meant. She agreed, with one condition. The exhibit had to include Viper 2-3's story too, had to make clear that the mission wasn't about one pilot's heroics, but about the fundamental promise between air and ground forces, the covenant that said, call for help and we will come, no matter the cost. The exhibit opened on a cold October morning, Ohio wind cutting across the museum grounds. Veterans and active duty personnel gathered to witness history being preserved. The centerpiece was a section of Hog 17's fuselage, the part that had taken the missile blast, reconstructed and mounted to show the damage and the armor that had absorbed it. Nadia's flight helmet sat in a climate-controlled case, the Ironside call sign stenciled on the side, scuffs and scratches telling stories the placard could only hint at. But what made Nadia's chest tight was the photo array. 8 faces, Viper 2-3, each with a brief caption about what they'd done after Afghanistan. Tours, retired, teaching high school history. The New York radio man running a construction company. The medic in medical school becoming a doctor. The youngest team member, career Army, now a sergeant first class training the next generation of special operations soldiers. All of them alive. All of them building lives that extended beyond that valley. All of them possible because a pilot had decided their survival mattered more than her own. The museum director gave a speech about valor and sacrifice, and the A-10's legendary toughness. A general pinned another medal on Nadia's dress blues, this one commemorating her entire career of service. Camera flashes popped. People applauded. But Nadia was looking at those 8 faces, thinking about the invisible threads that connected them across years and miles and circumstance. Thinking about the choice that wasn't really a choice, made in a fraction of a second, that had created ripples still spreading outward. After the ceremony, walking through the exhibit with her father older now, using a cane, still standing straight with that military bearing that never quite goes away, she stopped in front of a display showing the tactical map of the Tangi Valley mission. Her father studied it silently, reading the terrain, the approach vectors, the weapons employment sequence. Finally he said, "Your grandfather would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. You did what we all hope we'd do when the moment comes." Retirement came quietly, without drama, a change of uniform from active duty to veteran. Nadia found herself at loose ends initially, the structure of military life suddenly absent, days that had been regimented by mission requirements now open and formless. She tried consulting work, flew corporate aircraft for a while, taught at a civilian flight school. None of it felt right. The meaning was missing. The purpose that came from knowing your work mattered absolutely to people who depended on you. Then an email from the Air Force Academy. Would she be interested in teaching military history, specifically the evolution of close air support doctrine? The pay was modest, the position was academic rather than operational, but something about it resonated. Teaching future officers about the heritage they were inheriting, the promises they'd be making, the choices they'd face. She accepted. The cadets were young, earnest, mostly unaware of how much they didn't know. Nadia taught them the technical aspects, aircraft capabilities, weapon systems, tactical procedures. But she also taught them the human aspects, the weight of calling in strikes near friendly positions, the responsibility of being the person someone calls when they're about to die, the mathematics of risk that balanced mission requirements against crew survival. During one lecture on case studies in close air support, she showed the gun camera footage from the Tangi Valley mission. Didn't tell them initially it was her flight, just presented it as a tactical problem. Pilot takes missile damage during gun run, ground team still in contact, aircraft heavily damaged. What should the pilot do? The cadets debated it. Some argued for immediate egress, preserve the aircraft and crew, live to fight another day. Others argued for staying, the mission isn't complete, ground team needs support. Both positions had merit. Both had risk. Then Nadia told them the rest of the story. Told them about the choice, the damage, the flight home on one engine and determination. Told them about Tours and his team, about 8 lives that continued because someone decided they were worth the risk. The classroom went silent. A cadet in the front row, young woman, sharp eyes, probably a future pilot, asked quietly, "How did you know it was the right choice?" Nadia considered the question, the same one she'd been asking herself for years, refining the answer each time. "I didn't know, not with certainty, but I knew the alternative, leaving them without support, was definitely wrong. So I chose possible death over certain failure. That's not courage, that's just math." She paused, looking at each of them. "We're all going to commission as officers. Some of you will command troops in combat. Some will fly missions in contested airspace. All of you will face moments where the right choice is unclear, where the risk is real, where the easy decision and the correct decision aren't the same thing." Another pause. "In those moments, remember this: people are depending on you. Not on your career, not on your survival, but on your willingness to do the job you swore to do. That's the standard. That's what the uniform means." The semester continued. The cadets graduated. Some went to pilot training, carrying with them the lessons about choice and risk and purpose. Nadia kept teaching, kept telling the stories, kept passing forward the hard-earned knowledge that couldn't be learned from textbooks or simulations. Years accumulated. The legend of Ironside became history, then became teaching example, then became the kind of story that gets told to illustrate points about leadership and decision-making. The shadow box from Viper 23 hung in Nadia's office at the academy, next to her father's Air Force Cross citation from Vietnam, next to photos of aircraft and crews and missions that had defined 3 generations of pilots. One afternoon, a cadet knocked on her office door during posted hours. Lieutenant Akoy, now Major Akoy, working at the academy as an instructor pilot, the arc of her career mirroring Nadia's in ways that felt both coincidental and inevitable. "Ma'am, got a minute?" Akoy asked, that same earnest energy from years ago now tempered by combat experience and maturity. Nadia gestured to a chair. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're done flying." Akoy paused, organizing her thoughts. "You saved 8 lives in the Tangi Valley, but you also saved mine in a different way, showed me what right looks like, taught me that competence and courage aren't the same thing, but you need both." She leaned forward. "I've got students now asking me the same questions I asked you, about fear, about choice, about knowing when to push and when to back off. And I find myself telling them your stories, using your examples." Another pause. "That's legacy, isn't it? Not the medals or the missions, but the people you influenced who influence others, the chain of knowledge and values passing forward." Nadia felt something settle into place, some final piece of understanding about what the career had meant. "Yeah, that's legacy. The mission continues through people we trained, who train others, who carry forward the standard." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 pilots who'd both looked at death and decided to keep flying, who understood that the job was bigger than any individual mission or moment. Outside, cadets marched across the quad in formation, future officers learning to lead, preparing for choices they couldn't yet imagine. Akoy stood to leave, paused at the door. "Thank you, ma'am, for everything. For the Tangi Valley, for the example, for showing a generation of pilots that competence matters more than anything else." Nadia nodded. "Pay it forward, that's the job." After Akoy left, Nadia sat at her desk, looking at the shadow box, the photos, the accumulated artifacts of a career spent in the sky doing a job that mattered. Thought about Tors and his team, about students who'd become instructors, about the endless chain of people trying to do difficult things well. The phone rang. Unknown number, which usually meant spam, but something made her answer. "Colonel Kozlov, this is Captain Sarah Chen, A-10 pilot currently deployed. I'm Tor's son-in-law, married his daughter last year. He told me if I ever needed advice about the mission, about making hard choices, I should call you." Nadia smiled, the chain extending forward in real time. "What's your question, Captain?" They talked for 30 minutes. About tactics, about decision-making under pressure, about the weight of responsibility that comes with close air support, about the promise that when someone calls for help, you answer, even when answering is hard. When the call ended, Nadia sat back and looked at the Colorado sky through her office window, blue and infinite and full of possibilities. Somewhere out there, A-10s were flying missions, pilots were making choices, ground teams were calling for support. The mission continued. The standard held. The chain extended forward, link by link, person by person, choice by choice. She thought about that dawn at Bagram, the crippled aircraft limping home, the commander deleting no return and typing something else. Thought about the moment when giving up would have been easier but staying in the fight was right. Thought about 8 soldiers who grew old instead of dying young, who built lives and families and futures because someone decided they were worth saving. That was the measure of a career well lived. Not the medals or the rank or the recognition, but the lives touched, the standards upheld, the promise kept. In the Tangi Valley and everywhere else, in Afghanistan and Poland and every future battlefield where pilots would face impossible choices and find the courage to make the right one. The legend of Ironside would fade eventually. But the lesson would remain, carried forward by pilots who understood that competence, courage, and commitment weren't just words. They were the foundation of everything that mattered.